Hi, I'm Melisa Casses, and we're here at MPower Yoga Studio in Baltimore today. Today we'll be working on a pose called Bird of Paradise. In Sanskrit, it's called Svaga Dvijasana, which literally means heaven, two, and posture. And the heaven is the heaven where worthy souls go before being reincarnated, specifically. It's named after also the bird of paradise part comes from a flower, that it's a plant that grows in the tropics, and it looks sort of like a bird in the tropics. So it requires a lot that goes into this posture. It's a balancing posture, a standing posture, and we have to have open hips, lengthened hamstrings because the leg is extended, and back, core strength, focus, and balance. For me, I think the biggest benefit of this posture is actually the discipline that it takes to get into the posture. So it might not happen in a day, probably not. It might not happen in a month or in a year or in 5 years, but it's a really fun one to continue working on. And you can see a lot of progress. So we'll start with this modified Kurmasana pose. It's a modified tortoise pose. So here we can already start to open up our hips. We'll work our back muscles. We'll lengthen our spine. So I just want you to hold onto your ankles, bend your knees about 90 degrees, flex your feet about 90 degrees, and start to pull your chest forward. So as you pull your chest forward, engage your core, pull your belly in, use your elbows to gently press your knees toward the floor. So we're opening up our hips, and you'll take a few breaths. Now here, be careful not to round. I'm not rounding, lengthen your spine. So when we come into our bird of paradise and we are balancing, we want to be able to bind and lift our chest. Otherwise, if we're rounded forward, we might face plant. Okay, so we take a few breaths here, and then we'll work both sides just to work on our bind. Reach your arm underneath your knee. Now here it's really important. We're trying to get our shoulder pretty much underneath our knee, but we need our elbow for sure to clear. So once the elbow clears, here we'll take this internal rotation. I'm clearing my butt cheeks. This is the number one problem I see with people, students trying to get into Bird of Paradise, is they try to bind here. It won't work if we bind here. We've got to totally clear the glutes and bind just below, if we're looking at our leg, just below the glutes. Now here's our bind, half bind. Squeeze the shoulder blades back and together and hold it for a few breaths. Good, now my feet are still flexed, my hips are opening by far, my back muscles are working, my chest is pulling forward. So we've got all of the elements except for the hamstrings and the balance. And then we'll switch sides. So same thing, my knees are still flexed, my ankles are still flexed. I'm reaching my arm through, I'm clearing my knee and my elbow, good. And then I bind right here, squeeze the shoulder blades back and together, start to pull your chest forward. Imagine a turtle that's pulling forward of its shell. You know, its head's just kind of popping out of the shell. And take a couple breaths. Good, and then release. Now our hamstrings also want to be long, and there are lots of hamstring stretches that you can do throughout your practice. This wouldn't be a posture that you would put at necessarily the beginning of your practice. You would want some things to be nice and warmed up first, like hamstrings and hips, and switch sides. Good. All right, then we'll stand up. So now there are lots of ways to get into our Bird of Paradise. I like to do it from a Warrior Two position. So here if we come into Warrior Two, heel in line with the arch of your back foot, you guys know this, arms up, and then I'm making my way slowly into a half bind. I'm just gonna start with a half bind. Internally rotate your arm, so when you bend your elbow, you look kind of like a puppet, and your elbow is facing the sky. Slide your hand down along your back, grab your inner thigh. Now, if you don't have your inner thigh yet, that's perfect. That just gives us a place to work. So we go, okay, I'm gonna be here until I can get my pecs open. This is where people get hung up. As this starts to happen, draw your shoulder blade back, reach back, grab that inner thigh, and really grab it so that you are using this grip to open your pecs up even more. Now, I'm also using my elbow to press my knee back to open my hip at the same time. So holding your half bind for quite a few breaths. You could stay here for minutes if you wanted. That would be great. And then we're ready to go a little bit deeper. Now we get pretty low to be able to get this full bind. I'm moving this hand outside my thigh bone. Here I'm reaching my shoulder underneath my knee. Same internal rotation with the arm so that I'm able to bind behind my back. Now I'll show you what this looks like from the back. So when I bind behind my back, see, I'm clearing, I'm not grabbing butt cheeks, right? I'm really reaching around, I'm clearing my glutes. I grab my wrist, squeeze the shoulder blades back in together and be able to hold it here for a few breaths. So when we try to bind here, my arms are not long enough. And I see a lot of people doing this. You want to move over, away from the midline of the body so you can grab off to the side. So hold it there for a little bit. And then I'll come back, show you from the front. So I'm here and I'm in my bind. My hands are behind my back. Squeeze the shoulder blades back. Now I'll move my unbound foot all the way toward my bound foot. Stand. As you inhale, come up. Think my chest, my center of gravity needs to come up pretty quickly. As soon as I start to lift myself up, I squeeze my shoulder blades back in together, almost like I'm puffing my chest out. Then from here, my left leg, whichever leg you're working on, your standing leg, it will be straight without being locked. Okay, so we don't want to lock that knee out. Then start to extend your leg out toward the side. I like to spread my toes. It helps me feel more balanced and more active through that leg. Do what works for you. Think of a flower that's literally blooming and it's strong. It's got a really strong stalk or stem. Squeeze the shoulder blades back in together and start to lift and lift and lift and lift. You can also work with a bent knee variation for as long as you need to until your hamstrings feel ready. So reach and lift and reach and lift and reach and lift. And release, lower with control. So as I lower, I'm still holding my bind. My foot comes to the floor, and then release. There you go. That's your Bird of Paradise tutorial from MPower. Enjoy. Thank you.